kind of relationships that you have. And same thing's true when you have a privilege of spending several days with folks in a church setting and you gather together around God's Word. It's not just the preacher. Nothing happens when a preacher preaches to empty seats. Nothing happens when a preacher preaches to cold hearts. I don't care who the preacher is. But there is something special about it. And being able to be together around God's words. And I just thank you so much for this opportunity. We look forward to our next time to be with you. Would you go with me to James chapter 5? We're going to pick up in verse 7 and go through verse 11. And the concept of patience is going to be mentioned 7 times in 5 verses. Not hard to figure out what the passage of Scripture is about. And patience is not a subject a lot of us love to run to and talk about. Some years ago, I sat and read my Bible. We were living down here in Florida, and we used to go every Thanksgiving. I went to preach at a Thanksgiving service. Basically, the preacher invited me every year because he couldn't get anybody else to come on Thanksgiving. Told me that. But I promised the Lord when I was 18. I was a freshman in Bible college 50 years ago last month. And I would see preachers that were unhappy because they were not busy preaching. Something about having that gift in you and not being able to use it. And I told the Lord I wanted to be busy preaching. And I made a deal with God. I am fully aware today at 68, you're not supposed to make deals with God, but I was 18 then. I told the Lord, if He would keep me busy, I would never care about the size of the crowd that I preached to. I would never care about the offering associated with the preaching. And plus, I have never one time ever said anything to any preacher about finances. And then later, I kind of added on to that deal, said I would never care about the race of the people that I was preaching to, if He'd keep me busy. And I will tell you, He's kept me busy. And I try to go through all the doors the Lord opens. The Lord's allowed me as a result to preach in some interesting settings, interesting places. And this was a Thanksgiving Thursday afternoon service. And I just sit and read my Bible, thinking about it, trying to get ready for it. And we were getting close to leaving. And I came across this truth that's the center of the message today. And I got excited about it. And my son, who at that time I think would have been in junior high or early high school, said, "Dad, what you preaching about today?" I said, "Patience." He said, "No, seriously, what are you preaching about today?" Because I come across the truth. You know, God gave the New Testament scriptures in Greek. And some people foolishly try to run around, they're going to correct the English of the King James Bible with the Greek, and they don't have a clue what they're talking about. There's nothing to correct. However, the interesting thing, the Greek language sometimes will have more words that properly need to be translated by the same word into English than we're used to in English, and each of them has a little different slant on the meaning, and the Greek language can sometimes tell you how to understand the English, but it never corrects the English. And I just came across a truth. There's several different words that are properly translated patience when you get to the English, to have slightly different meaning. And usually when we think of patience, we think about just sitting and waiting for something to happen and being calm while we wait. And did you know there's a Greek word for that? Did you know that Greek word is never one time used in the Bible? Glory to God when I found that out. Never once in the Bible does it tell us to have that kind of patience. It's a good thing. Matter of fact, I came to realize after that, sometimes what we think of as the sin of impatience isn't really sin. You look in Revelation chapter 6 and the seal judgments, And the souls of those who've been martyred in the tribulation are in heaven. They have left their sin nature behind. They have no sin. And they're saying to the Lord, how long? So you're going to deal with this? When are you going to handle this? And it turns out that impatience wasn't sin. For some reason, I rejoice in that passage. I almost made it my life verse. But my son said, seriously, Dad, what are you going to preach on? I said, I'm preaching on patience. He just kind of walked away shaking his head. Somebody called a little bit later to wish us a happy Thanksgiving. Somebody knew me really well, and I told them I had to leave quickly. I'm going off to this. And they said, oh, what are you preaching on? I assumed they thought I was going to say Thanksgiving or something like that. And I said, patience. There's kind of a silence on the other end of the phone. I'm kind of known for using a lot of stories when I preach. And I do that on purpose because Jesus used a lot of stories when he preached. People remember the stories, and because they remember the stories, they remember the point. And there's kind of silence when I said I was preaching on patience, and a person on the other end said, not going to be one of those sermons with a lot of personal stories, is it? But the Greek word that's translated patience over and over again in this passage, properly translated that way, means to patiently keep working. Keep at it. Don't give up. Patiently devote yourself to getting the job done. We pick up verse 7. Let me read the verses and we'll go back through them. James chapter 5, verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, till he receive the early and latter rain. Be ye also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take my brethren the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. Let's go back and see what we can learn from that. First of all, the theme of this is real simple. Be patient, be patient, be patient, be patient. Keep on working, keep on working, keep on working. Be patient, therefore, brethren. How long? Pastor just mentioned it a moment ago. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. We're told exactly when we have the right to quit. When Jesus comes. Anybody looking around thinking Jesus is here already? So you know what you and I are supposed to be doing? Any of us gone to be with the Lord Jesus already? We're supposed to keep serving because the Lord hasn't come yet. Okay? We know when it is God intends for us to quit. Granted, your service for the Lord changes and develops. And the emphasis of it can take a different place. When I first started as a preacher, I was known as a preacher to teenagers. Youth work was my thing. I loved preaching to teens. I still do, but I don't get so much opportunity anymore. But I love being around teenagers. I love being a youth worker. And I loved being with the teenagers in the midst of all their craziness. I'd figured out you can have a great youth program based on one simple principle: allow the teenagers time to be crazy. They love it. And I liked being crazy with them when I was in my 20s. Then I got to my 30s, and I liked watching them being crazy. But I noticed I really didn't like the be crazy with them part. And then I got to the place where I figured out that sometimes them being crazy got on my nerves. I figured out maybe the Lord was giving me a different focus in ministry. It happens a lot. Your ministry may change in its scope, but you keep on serving because the Lord has not come yet. And then it gives you an example of this when it says, behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth. Here's our example, the farmer. Right? Some of you may come from a farming background or a farming area. Let me ask you this. How much of a crop does the farmer reap on the day that he plants? Absolutely none. Farmer learns, plant the crop in view of what you're going to reap in the future. See the long run. I can't tell you over the years how many people I've seen, well, I want to serve the Lord. I'm going to start being a Sunday school teacher. And in 6 months, they hadn't built the largest Sunday school class in the county, and they quit. So I want to build a choir. And I made 2 announcements, and I expect the choir loft to be filled. And it didn't happen that quick. So they give up. You're supposed to be like the farmer. You do what you do because you know that over a period of time, God will take that and bless it and use it and do something with it. Can I tell you, an awful lot of our churches have gotten in trouble because we have no sense of patience, no sense of waiting. We think if we don't have the answer to something today, we got to throw out everything that's worked for the last 50 years and try something new. Turns out that didn't work either. You just keep on serving the Lord faithfully. Just like the farmer. And something else that tells us about the farmer. It says he not only has patience, he has long patience. And it points this out. He has to wait for the early and the latter rain. You understand how the farming business works? God does not drop a crop on anybody. But the crop does not get produced because of the efforts of the farmer alone. With the early rain and the later rain, God has to bless the service of the farmer before anything good happens. And understand, we're supposed to learn something about the work of the Lord for that. You do your part. And you trust God for the rest of it, the part you couldn't do. And you keep serving faithfully. And by the way, I will tell you this, when you're serving the Lord, you very, very often don't have any idea what you're accomplishing, how much it is. I can't tell you the number of times, especially in recent years, and one of the great things about the invention of Facebook, you hear from people you hadn't talked to in years, and I'll hear from people, and they'll talk about what some sermon of mine did in their life 30 years ago, or something I taught did for them 20 years ago, and I didn't have any idea all that was accomplished. You just keep serving the Lord. Sometimes you don't ever know what you accomplished. I think I may have mentioned this week, going out, may have mentioned conversation with pastor, but getting the chance in Cambodia to go out on the Cambodian-Vietnamese border. And 34 churches in this valley, they don't consider themselves Cambodian or Vietnamese, either one. In fact, they'd be offended if you called them that. They have their own tribal language, their own tribal name. They had missionaries came there in the 1950s and translated the Bible into their language. They put their language into writing, translated the Bible into the language. They printed up a bunch of copies of the Bible. They started Bible-believing Baptist churches there. When the Cambodian Holocaust began in the 1970s, they told the missionaries to leave because they would all have been killed. And then the whole valley, the whole tribe, went up in the mountains and hid in the mountains for 20 years. When the communists got overthrown, after killing a third of the population of Cambodia, they came back down from the mountains to their traditional valleys. And I was asked if I would go back there, preach a preacher's meeting. They said there haven't been any Americans back there since the missionaries left in early 1970s. If I'd be willing to go, I went. I had the most blessed day back there, incredible set of circumstances. And you know, the Baptist churches that supported those missionaries, the day I was there preaching at a preacher's meeting, they had 34 different independent Baptist churches from that valley represented. 34. Do you know the churches that invested money in those mission works don't even know what's going on there as a result of what they did? They don't know the name of the mission board that sponsored the missionaries. They don't know how to say thank you to the churches that made their ministry there possible. They don't know who to be in communication with. But there are churches that invested 50, 60, 70 years ago in missions, and there are 34 Bible-believing churches in that one valley because of what those churches did back there, and they don't even know it. Won't heaven be an interesting place? When we get to find out how everything worked and what all was being done. I was preaching at a church in Tijuana, just an absolutely incredible church, Tijuana, Mexico, and I was asking them about it and how it started, and they said a missionary went through a Mexican village one day, stopped for something, I think for a meal or something, gave a gospel tract to somebody there. The gospel tract didn't have the name of any church or any address on it, just had the gospel in it. The guy got the tract, got saved. God worked in his heart. He came to the United States and went to Bible college, got trained, and went back to Tijuana, and started a church there that has reached thousands of people for the Lord. And the missionary that gave him that tract doesn't even know that happened. I got to tell you, heaven's going to be an interesting place. And you begin to find out all of what God did. You keep on serving. Trust God to do the part you cannot do, and you keep doing the part you can do. And watch what God does, and watch how God works. You just keep on serving. You know something else about this? Look at the next verse. Be ye also patient. That's the second point. He said it's exactly the same as the first point. It surely is. Be also patient. Establish your hearts. You settle this, you are going to serve God. You put it in place. You do it that way. You make it your life. You make it so settled that nothing can take this, nothing can move you, nothing can change this. The pastor under whose ministry I was saved, bless his heart, it was an interesting thing. He pastored a denominational church. It was not a church that believed in salvation by faith in its doctrinal statement. But somehow he got a hold of the truth of salvation by faith. He preached it. He taught it. I got saved in that setting. One day, Bishop found out about it and fired him. Everything he had done, everything he had built, everything he'd accomplished was lost in a moment. He went on serving the Lord. Built a church building in his backyard and started an independent Baptist church there. And years later, my first pastorate, when I was going through some rough times and some heartbreak, I talked to him and said, look, I know what you went through. How did you keep going on through all that? And his response to me was, he said, it's very simple. You settle one thing. Who do you serve? So if you're serving yourself, you might have reason to change. So if you're serving the people of a particular church, they might disappoint you or not want you anymore. But if you're serving the Savior, you just keep right on serving because he hasn't changed any. So just settle one thing. Who do you serve? Establish your hearts. Why? For the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. I thought you just said that. I did. It was in verse 7. God thought it was important enough to repeat again. The Lord is coming back. And if he comes back in your lifetime, how do you want to be found when he comes back? How about serving him, being faithful to him, being used of him? You just keep on serving. That verse 7 and verse 8 are about patience. Verse 10 and verse 11 are about patience. But right in the middle of 4 verses about patience, 2 verses about patience, 2 verses about patience, there is a verse that does not mention patience. So I pondered on that. Why did God stick that right there in the middle? As you look at it, verse 9. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Would you look back with me? We're going to come right back here. Would you look back with me to Galatians chapter 5 and verse 15 for a moment? I was preaching a revival meeting in church one time. And a lot of churches have a door in the back, and they'll have a banner or a saying over the door, like you're now entering the mission field or something like that, This church had a banner over the door in the back. You can see it. It stared at you the whole time you were preaching. Their banner said 2 words: no biting. That's quite a sort of interesting message. So, pastor's taking me out to lunch after the morning message, and I said, honestly, is this an issue here, that you need this sign? And he took me to this verse. But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. We can have such a spirit and such an attitude in dealing with each other that it's like spiritually we were biting one another and we can destroy one another. Now, going back to James chapter 5, right in the middle of this passage about patience, the Lord tells us not to do this, not to have a grudge against one another. So I'm asking myself, why is that in the middle of a passage about patience? And after thinking about it a bit, it dawned on me. What's the biggest reason most people quit serving the Lord? They got mad at somebody. They got mad at the preacher. They got mad at somebody else in the church. They got mad at some famous preacher they've never met before. They got mad at somebody that took their seat or didn't appreciate their song or got in their way in Sunday school or got the position at church they wanted or whatever. And they get mad, so they just quit serving the Lord. I wish I had a little money for every time as a preacher I have visited in somebody's home that was not coming to church anymore, and I tried to talk to them about it, tried to encourage them, and I heard who they were mad at. So right in this middle of this discussion, you keep on serving, don't bear a grudge at anybody, because that's liable to cause you from keep on serving. Wait a minute, what am I going to do? You don't know how bad what this person said was, how bad what this person did was, huh? I'll be honest with you, most of the time when somebody's upset, they're upset because they're imagining what somebody else thought. And can I give you a little clue about that? Your imagination is not connected to reality. And most of the time when you're imagining what somebody else thought, that is the devil playing a trick on you. But sometimes people do foolish things. So what in the world are we going to do? We don't want us to keep us from serving the Lord. Forgive them. See, why are you going to heaven? I imagine everybody here is a professing believer. Why are you on your way to heaven? Because you have been forgiven. And this principle turns up over and over and over again in the New Testament. The same way you have been forgiven, forgive. God's plan. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Y'all ready? See, we get angry at somebody, and we think nobody knows the anger I feel or what's going on in my heart or what's going on in my mind. Guess what? The Lord knows everything you thought, everything you did, everything you wished you could do. He knows everything you were thinking when you said to that brother and sister, good to see you again, but that's not what you were thinking on the inside. They didn't hear it. God did. The judge stands at the door. You are not slipping anything past him. So don't bear a grudge against one another, brethren. There's somebody that you got a grudge against, and it limits your service for the Lord. Nobody else knows it. You think that's your own secret, petty sin. You would never get up and talk about it in a testimony in church. You'd never tell the pastor this. But you get rid of that so that you can keep on serving the Lord. And that will not get to you, and that will not stop you. Verse 10. Take my brethren, the prophets, who've spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Would you go to Hebrews chapter 11 with me for a moment? It's not far back in the scripture. And we could take the entire chapter. But for time's sake, I'll pick up in verse 32. See, these are supposed to be our examples. The Hebrew prophets are supposed to be our examples in serving the Lord. Now watch, because it's so very, very important. I've told you I'm a history guy as well as a preacher. Did you know faithful believers throughout the history of the world have endured most often tremendous amounts of persecution? I have been places where faithful believers are persecuted now. I can see the handwriting on the wall for us. If something doesn't happen, boy, some of these government folks really enjoyed shutting down the churches. It wasn't a tragedy for them that they felt like they had to carry that out. Some of them really enjoyed it and haven't been able to get away from it yet. Look up in Canada. But we have an example. Look at verse 32. Hebrews 11. What shall I more say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson, of Jephthah and of David also, and Samuel and other prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Well, that sounds pretty exciting so far. Sometimes serving the Lord is exciting like that. Sometimes he does some amazing things for you. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes having people oppose you is fun when you see what happens to them and how it works out. Who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again. So far, that sounds pretty exciting. These are our examples. You want the rest of the example? Others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others had trial of cruel mocking and scourgings. Yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains, like my friends on the Cambodian-Vietnamese border, in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise. They kept on serving. They're our example. You keep on serving when God is performing miracles and wonders on your behalf, and you enjoy the fight. And you keep on serving when the circumstances are nothing you wanted. The circumstances are nothing you planned for. Do you understand? We in the United States have been spoiled as Christians. We have served the Lord without meaningful persecution. We have preached what we wanted to preach. We've said what we thought needed to be said. We've carried out our church programs. And a little bit of opposition here and there. When I was in Florida, I had just gotten to Florida to be a Bible college administrator, and the state of Florida passed a law that said Florida had to regulate Bible colleges. And some of us said, we cannot accept that because the state is not over the church. I led a fight here in Florida for 5 years. Multiple hours, trips more than I could count to Tallahassee, conversations, We were threatened and threatened and threatened, and nobody ever tried to carry out any of those threats. They just thought that threatening us would end everything. Long story short, God worked for us miraculously. I mean, he intervened for us. And I'm over there in Haines City, Florida, and I'm reading a local Haines City paper, and I found out the Department of Education branch that we were dealing with, Department of Independent Colleges, the chairman of it had resigned, and the governor had just appointed a new chairman, and he was a businessman right there in Haines City. His office was 3 blocks from our college. More than that, we had bought 5 buildings from the First Presbyterian Church of Haines City, and he had represented the church, Presbyterian Church, in the negotiations, and I represented Landmark in the negotiations. We'd spent hours and hours together. I called him, told him I'd read the newspaper article. I congratulated him on being appointed to that position. I said, by the way, did anybody tell you that your department is trying to put us and all the people like us in jail? They were threatening us with jail all the time. And he's a little surprised to hear that. He said, maybe we need to sit down and talk. And he came right over to my office, sat down with Dr. Carter and me. We went through and explained everything to him, and he looked at us. And he said, I want you to understand something. He said, I am a Christian before I'm a politician. That law will never be enforced while I'm the chairman of this commission. And he said, I'll do everything in my power to help you change that law. We started going to Tallahassee, and we'd gone before trying to lobby and trying to talk to the politicians and all that. And nobody was taking us very seriously. But when we walked up to talk to a member of that representatives or the Senate, and the government agency that we were fighting, the head of the government agency was coming with us to lobby them to change the law. You know, that got everybody's attention. They started listening to us. But more than that, we still had some serious opposition. But a professional lobbyist for trade colleges, $500 an hour lobbyist, that's what he charged to lobby the people in the state legislatures for the trade colleges. He'd been to meetings where he heard all this discussed, and he came to us one day and he said, you know, this is silly. He said, these people can't run their own colleges. What makes them think they can run Bible colleges? He said, when you're ready to put on a big push, call me, I'll give you a week at no charge. So now we have the head of the commission that we're fighting, a professional lobbyist who knows how to get appointments and get in the door. And we're going through talking to person after person. But a bunch of preachers showed up to help us, and we couldn't take everybody into every meeting. And I was saying, man, we're just talking. I said, well, wouldn't it be great if we had another lobbyist? And we're walking down a hallway in Tallahassee. Dr. Carter, myself, our lobbyists from the trade schools, the chairman of the commission, 2 or 3 other preachers. And from down the hallway, we hear, Dr. Carter, what are you doing here? There's a young man that had graduated from his high school 10 years before that he lost touch with. You want to know why he was there? He's a professional lobbyist. We told him what we were doing, how we wished we had another lobbyist. He whipped out his cell phone, called his boss, and said, can I have a few days off? And we had 2 professional lobbyists getting us meetings. Then we went in and talked to the member of the House of Representatives from Pensacola. And so he immediately got on the phone and called Pensacola Christian College, said, what do you think about this? Pensacola had told us you have no chance to win. If you'd had any chance to win, we'd help you, but there's no chance you can win. So we've been fighting for 5 years without him. But he called Pensacola, and the folks at Pensacola said, well, how does this work? Do they have a chance at winning? And that representative said, I don't know where he got the concept from, but he said it's about 50-50 right now. The next day, Pensacola had 12 professional lobbyists in Tallahassee. And we had 14 professional lobbyists. We were putting preachers with all of them, and they're all going around. And I'm talking to one guy, and he said, my last 6 appointments have been people lobbying for your bill. He said, Fortune 500 companies cannot put on a lobbying effort like this. He said, who are you? I got to tell you, that was fun. Finally, they said to me, write us a bill. I literally wrote the bill that is still the law in the state of Florida today. I put 3 things in it. Said if your college has a religious purpose, a religious name, and it doesn't take government money, you're not under the jurisdiction of the state because of the separation of church and state. And that passed overwhelmingly, and is still the law in Florida today. I got to tell you, that was kind of fun. It came up recently because the state of Illinois passed the exact same law, and we're fighting it right now. And in an attempt to show that this law is a bad idea, one of the Department of Education in Illinois fights us. And we've passed the Illinois State Senate unanimously 4 years in a row, and the State House of Representatives will not allow us to have a vote on the same legislation. But they every year there is a hearing with the Senate Education Committee, and we go speak at it, and Education Department comes in, talks about why it's a terrible idea, we must regulate Bible colleges, etc. And one of them said they'd done some research on the law I got passed in Florida, and it's a dangerous law. You want to know what the proof was that it's dangerous? Since it passed, there have been 305, according to them, new Bible colleges started in the state of Florida. And one of the senators said, I wish we could get 305 Bible colleges started in the city of Chicago. It hadn't gotten fun yet in Illinois, to be honest with you, but it was fun in Florida, and we're not done in Illinois. I'm just telling you, sometimes this business is fun. Sometimes it isn't. In Syria, most incredible week of my life in the year 2005. I got to go to Syria. I think I mentioned some of the story. A preacher in Iran heard there was an American preacher in Syria, which normally couldn't happen. And he'd never met a preacher from America, but had always wanted to, because he knew America's part in sending missionaries around the world. And there's free travel between Iran and Syria, so he came to Syria just because he wanted to meet an American preacher. Kept him in my hotel with me, in my room. It's fascinating. He didn't speak a word of English. And I don't speak any Farsi. Everything was sign language, and it was the most ridiculous, hysterical thing you ever saw in your life. We had great fellowship together. 2 years later, his ministry was smuggling Bibles into Iran. I got word 2 years later, he got caught. And in order to keep him from smuggling Bibles again, they cut off both of his hands at the wrist, so he would never carry a Bible into Iran again. You understand how spoiled we are? Somebody says something unkind to us. We say, I've been persecuted. I will tell you, here in Florida, they sent a letter to a Bible college. They were going to try to put their big move on, and they sent a letter to a Bible college and said, you have to cease and desist, or you're going to be arrested. So I called them, Department of Education. I tell this story, and most people think I'm talking about liberal Democrats. It was Jeb Bush's administration. I called the Department of Education and said, okay, you sent your letter. And that preacher's not going to obey your cease and desist letter. He does not believe you have the authority to tell a church to cease and desist. So now the ball's in your court. What are you going to do? They said he has to close. We sent him a letter. I said, you don't know much about Baptist history. Said, we've been burned at the stake, beheaded, fed to wild animals, shot by firing squads. I said, we don't necessarily jump because somebody sent us a letter. I'm just telling you, these Old Testament prophets, there are examples. And sometimes God intervenes so miraculously. By the time Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are coming out of the fire, I'll bet they looked back on that as being fun. But I bet they didn't necessarily think it was fun when they were being thrown in. When Daniel came out of the lion's den. Have you ever wondered about that, what God did with the lions? He could have done it any way he chose. Daniel could have been there, and the lions could have come running, wanting to rip him to pieces and devour him, and God just wouldn't let him, and he stopped them right when they got there. That could be. Or God could have tamed them and made little kitty cats out of them, and they could have come up and rubbed his legs while he petted them. I don't know how he did it. We just know he did it. I'll bet on the way out of the lion's den, Daniel thought that was fun. He may not have felt the same way on the way there. Take the prophets as our example. Whatever the circumstances or whatever it is God chooses to do, just keep on serving. Back to James 5. Verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Do you see that, Pastor? We count them happy. Didn't say they always were happy. We read the stories of people that serve the Lord to challenge and difficulty and heartache and bad health and etc. And we look at them and we look at the results of their life and their ministry and we say, man, they must have been happy. But you want to bet there were some moments when they weren't. You want to know why we count them happy? They kept on serving. They just kept on serving. And he says, to make the point, you've heard of the patience of Job? You all have heard of the patience of Job, right? I know some of you did recently. You've heard of the patience of Job? And have seen the end of the Lord? See, Job's story does not end like it was in the middle. In the beginning, it's a great story. Man, he's the richest man in the East and the godliest man on the planet. That's a wonderful family. Isn't that a great story? Not such a great story in the middle. I'm just telling you, in the middle of the story, an awful lot of people would have quit serving the Lord. Lost all his wealth, lost his children, his wife turned on him, lost his health. I'm going to tell you, you want to know what most independent Baptists would have done right then? They'd have give up on God. How dare he treat me like this? How dare he fail me like that? You want to know what Job did? He kept on serving. In the last chapter of the story, he's got his wealth back, restored to his wife. He's got 10 new children. You just keep on serving. I don't know what the Lord's going to do when you keep on serving. Sooner or later, he's going to take you out of this world. Sooner or later, your health is going to fail. You might keep on serving, and you can see the forces out there that would like to do something about us, to stop us, are just barely restrained right now. Will they get turned loose? Or be restrained yet? I'm not gloom and doom about America. Do you know how many times America has come out of terrible situations? In fact, I took a line from a song in our national national anthem, that to name my history books called The Heaven Rescued Land. You want to know how many times God has rescued this land? I'm hoping and praying there'll be another chapter. But I don't know that for a fact. God has allowed other nations to collapse. I don't know what happens when you keep serving. This much I know. You want what the will of God is for you? Keep on serving. See, you can survive anything as long as you don't quit. You say, but I made a mistake. But everybody's made a mistake. Keep on serving. I was disappointed by somebody. Everybody's been disappointed by people. Just keep on serving. Said, I've had moments of ill health. I can tell you right now, getting hit by a semi-truck doesn't make your day. They've taken the door off the car, and they're wanting to take me up the hill on a stretcher, but I don't want to be on a stretcher on an angle, and I'm walking, and they're helping me walk, and I get up there, and they put me in the ambulance, and I'm talking to the nurse in the ambulance. It turns out she's a Christian. She's telling me some of what's happened. She said, I told her I'm a Christian, I'm a preacher. She said, apparently God is not done with you yet. They take me to the hospital, and I'm talking to the emergency room nurse, and it turns out she's a Christian. And she says to me, she said, apparently God is not finished with you yet. She's the one who told me about the deaths. I had guessed, but she's the one who confirmed it. Emergency room doctor comes in and works on me. Turns out he's a Christian. He says, what you do is more important than what I do. He said, all the people that I help physically end up dying someday. He said, what you do lasts forever. And apparently God's not finished with you doing it yet. My pastor calls when he hears what's happened. He talks with me a bit. He says, Phil, Dr. Stringer, apparently God's not done with you yet. And I immediately posted it on Facebook because I knew people would hear about the accident. They'd hear people died. I didn't want them to think I was one of the people that died. And I had a couple preacher friends that lived in the town where they've taken me to the hospital who come over to the hospital to stay with me. They stay with me. Cindy's 5 hours away. Stay with me till Cindy can get there. And you know what they both say to me? Apparently, God is not done with you yet. So yeah, you will have some physical moments. And even one day, you'll go to be with the Lord in glory. But until then, you keep on serving. Keep on serving. You can survive other people's failures. You can survive your failures. You can survive your weaknesses. You can survive the bad things in our culture. You can survive anything except quitting. So whatever you do, you don't quit. You keep on serving. You keep on serving. So whatever set of circumstances God hands you, keep on serving, keep on serving, keep on serving. God bless you all.